Over to you, Ross.
Hi everyone, welcome along to DigiShift 65, Digital Inclusion and the Cost of Living Crisis. So today we're going to be joined by Claudia Baldacchino. I'm really sorry if I pronounced your surname in a really rubbish way, Claudia. Claudia is Communications and Digital Manager at People Know How. She's been working hard to build the Charities comms and digital strategies and digital infrastructures. She's also been leading on the Charities digital transformation campaign and lobbying work, including our current campaign to end data poverty in Scotland called Connectivity Now. We'll put a link to that in the chat as well. We're also going to be joined by Aaron Slater, who's Digital Participation Project Manager at SCDO. Aaron's been at the centre of much of Scotland's leading approaches to digital inclusion, including Connecting Scotland and the Thriving Digital Champions community. We're going to jump straight into this one today, and we're going to hear from Claudia first of all.
Hiya. So yeah, as Ross said, I'm Comms and Digital Manager at People Know How. So People Know How, for anyone that hasn't heard of us, we're a social innovation charity, which allows us to kind of have quite a broad portfolio of work. And one of those key areas is digital inclusion and data poverty. So my kind of involvement in digital went a bit crazy over COVID when I led our digital transformation and started working on our campaigning and lobbying work in the form of Connectivity Now, our campaign. But our digital inclusion work is kind of rooted in our Reconnect service, which supports people across Edinburgh and East Lothian to improve well-being through increasing social and digital inclusion. So we've believed for quite a while that the two are inextricably linked. We've been doing this work since about 2016. And so we've always kind of looked at the two together as opposed to separately, and how digital inclusion is quite intrinsic to that social inclusion as well and well-being. So we do this service runs through digital groups that we run across in various communities, and we do that through various collaborations and partnerships with grassroots organizations and small charities, community spaces. So we have kind of a network of those community groups, which we call digital groups. And there's like a little interactive map on our website if anyone's interested. So we're kind of traveling around with the idea of working with those organizations, and the idea is that at some point as well, we're giving them those tools, so we don't necessarily have to be there forever. We can then kind of impart that information and keep those going without necessarily being massively involved as well. We also do one-to-one digital support, and we also run the Connecting Scotland digital support helpline, which we're doing quite a lot of promotion on at the moment. So that's open across Scotland, and that's just any kind of digital support with any device. All of this work and our learning from this work we've used to develop our Connectivity Now campaign, which has three kind of main points. We want to regulate connectivity, we want to zero rate essential service websites, and we want to share connectivity through things like social shared housing and community spaces. And that's a big piece of work that we're inviting people to pledge to record a little video to work alongside us. And we're also, events like these are all part of that work, and just really spreading the word as well. We've done a lot of work with Good Things Foundation as well, just kind of developing resources, and we're ambassadors for Good Things Foundation as well in Scotland. I think we're the only ambassador in Scotland. So yeah, lots of work around this space.
Thanks, Claudia. That was really good. We're gonna hold for questions once we've heard from Aaron, and then we'll get a chance for a general chat. So, Aaron, do you want to jump in then?
Thanks, Ross. Hi, everyone. Nice to see some familiar digital inclusion faces. So I'm Aaron, Digital Participation Manager at SCDO. I kind of came along today just to talk about kind of where we're at in our thinking around digital inclusion in the context of cost of living crisis. I kind of see cost of living crisis as kind of poverty kind of intensified and kind of creeping into more and more households across the country. And when we know that poverty is inextricably linked with digital exclusion, we know then that obviously digital exclusion is going to become more of an issue. It's going to affect more households, and more people are actually going to end up being cut off from digital access. And what's kind of one of my reflections thinking about that is thinking over the last 3 years and how we came through the pandemic, and how digital exclusion was really such a hot topic, and how everyone understood digital access as an essential lifeline and such huge levels of buy-in and a lot of work happening to help address the digital divide. And I felt like there's real momentum there, but it also feels like that's dipping off now as well, and we're in a slightly different context. And that feels like a really dangerous space to be in right now, because actually now more than ever, people really need that access to devices, access to connectivity, and access to being able to develop their skills and confidence. But the impetus doesn't feel like it's there as it was during the pandemic. And when we know the benefits that digital can bring to people to help alleviate some of the symptoms of poverty and the cost of living crisis, it feels like there's a lot that could be happening there that's not. And that got me thinking a lot about some of the discussions we're having as a team at the moment is around how do we reframe digital inclusion? How do we think about it slightly differently? Or rather, how do we start to shift some of the responsibility? So a lot of the time when we talk about digital inclusion, we talk about kind of the key steps that you need to take to include someone's motivated, someone has access to a device, they get access to connectivity, and they build their skills and confidence. And a lot of the time that journey feels really centered on that person and what that person needs to do to realize some of the benefits of being digitally included. What it doesn't do a lot of the time is actually think about, well, who else bears responsibility as part of this conversation? Where else does responsibility sit? So an individual, yes, benefits from being online, but loads of others benefit too. So anyone running services, essential public services, private sector, all reap benefits from people being engaged and being online. But a lot of the time you don't see the activity we might want to see there to support some of that work. So how do we start to shift that? So thinking about how do you apply a different lens to that journey that someone has to take? So when we talk about motivation, how is someone motivated to get online? Well, what are services doing to actually address that motivation gap as well? And even thinking about that through the lens of data privacy, we know is a huge issue, a huge barrier around motivation. And that came out of the Lloyd's Consumer Digital Index last year. It was the single highest thing for those that are offline that was a barrier for them. So how can services be designed better to explain kind of their privacy notices and understand some of the barriers and fears that people have about giving personal information to services? When we think about devices, what else can we do around devices and getting device access to people? How can we leverage partners, especially in the corporate sector, to do more around device donation and thinking about kind of circular economy and some of the great projects that are happening across Scotland, and People Know How being one of those examples with the work they do around device refurb. How do we build more into that and have more donations? Connectivity, it's that thing of a lot of us might take it for granted whenever we use public services online or use anything online. If you're on unlimited data and you've got broadband at home, but when you're on a pay-as-you-go SIM card and everything you do online is essentially costing you money, and that's a decision you have to make, balancing that against where you're spending your money elsewhere. It's essentially charging people for services. So things like zero rating essential public services. How do we do more around that? How do we lobby government, UK government in this case, who has that as a reserved matter, to do work with telco providers to make sure that actually accessing services, essential public services, doesn't cost people that don't have the money to use it in the first place? Or how do we design apps, platforms, web pages better so that they're low consumption of data usage when people do that, to at least mitigate some of the costs that are then attached with that? And then skills, what more can we do around skills, and where does that responsibility sit? So we know there's some work happening in some sectors, in the private sector around banking, where some staff are trained up, but how do we do more of that? And how do we encourage people to make the right contribution at the right place and at the right time? So we know that trusted relationships are really key to helping people build relationships. But is corporate social responsibility, half-day volunteering time, the best contribution that someone can make? Or how can they better support activities that already happen in our communities? And essentially think about how do we get better at designing digital inclusion into the activity that's happening? How do we design digital inclusion into the design of public services? So at the moment we're doing some work with digital health and social care, and that's looking at exactly that, is what does conscious and deliberate design of digital inclusion look like when you're developing new public services? So I think for me, it's about that thing of, we'll quite often say digital inclusion is everyone's responsibility, but not everyone actually picks up the tab on it, and not everyone does the work. We know the voluntary sector and colleagues in public sector too are overrepresented in a lot of the work to tackle digital exclusion. but how can we do more? Where are the points of leverage that we can bring other people in to realize their responsibilities in this as well, if they're willing to reap the benefits of people being online? Where's the action to support that? That's what's buzzing through my head right now around digital inclusion.
Thanks, Sam. There was loads in there. I'm sure there were loads of questions as well from people. Some amazing stuff in there. Okay. I'm going to open up for questions. I know, John, you've got a question in the chat. We'll see if anyone else wants to jump in, and then we'll get to your one. Does anyone want to ask any questions for Aaron or Claudia? Maybe once we get the ball rolling, people will be more relaxed and have more coffee coursing through your veins. John, what was your question?
So there's a question for Claudia about connectivity now, and obviously you were referencing that it's partly working with telcos, but also housing providers and a whole quite wide range of different sectors. And I just wondered if you'd find that any were more open than others to the issues and making the changes that are needed.
Yeah, so we do a lot of cross-sectoral work. That we have a concept called Connect 4, in which we're connecting the 4 sectors: academic, public, third, and business. And yeah, I think the 4 sectors look at it kind of from a very different lens, which is just something that we need to be aware of when we're speaking with them. So we have a lot, it's quite easy for us to get relatively good engagement from the third sector, because obviously we're within that space. But places like the business sector, where we in COVID we were asking for donations and things like that, we got quite a lot of tech donations from them. So they're kind of looking at it from a corporate responsibility standpoint. But I don't think that, well, depending on, obviously business sector is quite large and varied, but depending on who you're talking to, there's that kind of, we need to be communicating that concept that digital isn't the be all end all of kind of formats, and that things need to be in different formats. I think people need to be able to have access to, I don't know, telephone support as well as online support and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of a different way of communicating it. The academic sector has been great. We've actually just signed an MOU with the University of Edinburgh, and as part of that, they'll be helping us with that kind of campaigning work as well. We have a pledge from them as well, which is great. So they've been great in terms of research around this kind of thing. We're establishing an action research project as well that's in the works. So there's lots of exciting research standpoints that we'll be then using to kind of fuel and back our continuing campaigning. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Yeah, it's really helpful. I think we've got a question for Aaron now from David. It's in the chat. Should I say it so it's obvious what it is? So it's about, is data poverty more of an issue currently than access to a device? And we've got an evidence base to support one or the other.
Good question, David. And I think instinctively, my mind is to say connectivity is a bigger issue, but anecdotally, the queries we get most often off the back of Connect in Scotland kind of not being actively delivering services right now is requests around where people can find devices. As we get the device question a lot more than connectivity, but also when we look at kind of looking back at Connect in Scotland, it was just over 60,000 people supported through that, but and that was kind of marked against devices, but only about 3/4 of them actually took the connectivity option. So just kind of at that scale, we knew that devices were more sought after than actually the connectivity. And I suppose there's maybe a few reasons for that. It could be people already had the connectivity at home. We did see that in some scenarios where people have maybe a Sky package at home. So you've got the broadband and stuff, and maybe a device has become obsolete or broken, or at that point in time, it's a big outlay to actually afford the device on its own. So kind of, I suppose, a few reasons why that might be, or people using connectivity in communal spaces. But yeah, based on kind of some of the stuff we're hearing at the moment, it's devices is what people seem to be asking for most at the moment.
Could I chip in here as well? I think that, yeah, we have a lot of conversations about this as well. We used to talk about the 3 strands of digital exclusion: the device, the connection, and the skills. and we still very much look at those three together. But what we always had in mind, because over COVID we delivered over 3,000 devices. We've always done skills support, and data became something that was really big on our minds. And data was such a big one because it wasn't something that we could solve. Like, we can give someone a device, we can give them skills support, but we can't pay for all of our service users' connections to the internet for the rest of their lives, kind of thing. And we've been talking very recently about what does it actually mean to be digitally included, because some of the stats that are being recorded, how do they measure? When are you digitally included? When is that, in some people's minds, when's that book closed? We move on to the next person. And we're kind of working as well on a bit of research with a lot of other organizations on the minimum digital living standard, and what does that look like? And I think a lot of the people that we support, they come to us with their device that maybe they've had for a few years, and they're thinking, right, maybe I'm not getting actually the most out of this device, but how do you know you're not getting most out of it until you do know? And then that's when they come to us and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's why we're obviously running the campaign around data, but it's just, they're all super interlinked and no one person is the same, but it's how do we really measure that level of digital inclusion?
Thanks, Claudia, that was really good. I had a question, which is, I guess, for the charities in the room that are more traditional frontline service delivery organisations. What are the ways that they can get started with this if they don't have anything around digital inclusion embedded in their work at the moment? And that's for both of you, I guess.
I think for me, it's looking at, yeah, I suppose the start of that organizational journey, and where we've seen it done well or where we've seen real challenges with that. And I suppose it exists on different layers, in layers of the structures of the organization, and you kind of rely on each layer being bought in to support that. And that really kind of the culture of the organization really underpins the ability to do it well or not. So is senior management bought in, and do they give the authority to the rest of the organization and empower them to work in a way that is digital and recognizes the benefit for both them as an organization, but for the people that you serve? I think it's really important to have that kind of strategic level buy-in. But a lot of the time the blockers can be kind of at management, at middle management level or frontline staff, where there's understandably fears around what actually doing digital inclusion looks like. And it can be quite complex a lot of the time, especially if you're doing, if you're giving out devices, and there'd be a lot of fears around, am I increasing risk and vulnerability to people by giving them devices or showing them certain things, and where do the boundaries exist around this? So I think having a really clear kind of strategy bought in from the top to support that, to filter it down. I think with anything, it's kind of tapping into who are the keen beans in the organization that actually really get this and will kind of lead the way, who are the early adopters as part of your digital inclusion journey, and really how you understand the benefits of digital inclusion embedded within the outcomes you're already working towards. So it's not seeing digital inclusion or doing digital as something extra, and that's the challenge we've been battling for a number of years now, and it kind of still will keep coming up. But digital is the enabler, so you're doing the same things, you're achieving the same outcomes, but we can't escape the fact we do live in a digital world, and it's not the digital world versus the real world as two separate things. It's the same world, it's the same reality we live in, there's just different ways of doing things. And with so much being online now, it just feels so essential that people are empowered and skilled and have the choice to do it online. So I think, yeah, it's really helping staff understand they're still doing the same work, still achieving the great outcomes they're already working towards. They're just using digital as that enabler to help them get there. But yeah, I think culture is the big piece, and that buy-in across all levels. And without that, you do see it run into trouble.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Claudia, do you want to come on that one as well?
Yeah, I think I mean, this really kind of hits home for me because I've kind of internally, I've been kind of helping people know how to become a lot more digital over the past few years. And although that is separate, it does really lead into this ethos of having digital work alongside what we're already doing. I mean, I'm currently working on a CRM for the organization. And I mean, sometimes I feel embarrassed to say that, because like, how do we not already have the CRM but there's certain things happen in different kind of like, I've forgotten the word entirely, but things happen at different times for different organizations. For us, the CRM has apparently come at the end, but I think it shouldn't be embarrassing. It's not embarrassing because it is all part of our digital transformation, and this kind of move to Teams, move to kind of SharePoint and cloud file storage and things like that. It sounds sometimes to certain people, I think it can sound quite boring, and I feel like such a pedant sometimes when I'm going on about it, but it really has kind of changed the mindset as well. And just as it's become indispensable for us as an organization, it's equally indispensable for so many people in today's world. And there's kind of a barrier that we sometimes hit when we're looking for volunteers to support digital work, in that people see the word digital or IT and they kind of shy away from those opportunities because they think they need to be an expert. And really what we're looking for in a volunteer is have you turned on a computer and known what you were doing? You can be a digital support volunteer. Sometimes there's the tendency to get caught up in these conversations, and people just think, oh no, digital is not for me. But we kind of take it for granted that we're doing digital every single day, and that's really all we're looking for in volunteers, to help somebody else complete those basic tasks as well. And I think, like, even for an organization, there's definitely you're gonna be promoting your work online, showcasing it online, attracting your service users, your volunteers, your staff online. It might go unsaid, but that's how I'm here today, from walking into a charity and going, why don't you have these things? And someone going, okay, you do it then. So I think, yeah, it's very it's something that we don't think about too much. But also just in terms of this idea that digital is embedded in everything, we talk a lot about the poverty premium, and this idea that this thing that where people on lower incomes are paying more for essential goods and services, and that really ties into how we're seeing connectivity as a basic right, and that kind of viewing digital inclusion as so essential, I think, is so important to getting that ethos in an organization that wants to provide that sort of support. My colleague told me the other day that one of our partners has said that their service users were selling their devices to buy food, which is shocking to hear. So although there is always that kind of dichotomy of, yes, if you need to buy food, you would buy food over a digital device. I fully understand that. And so when we're talking about digital, I think some people can just think, right, well, it's not as essential, but I think it obviously can help. It can help you save money in the long run. It can help you be connected. It can help your well-being. And it's not just in COVID. We talked a lot about that in COVID, and now it's like, oh, we're fine, we can see each other in person. But everyone's using these things to stay connected. And if you're excluded from that, then you're not socially included to a certain extent. So yeah, I feel like I should stop there because I'm rambling. But
no, I thought there's some really, really good points there. And so part of it, I think, for me, is like there's the practical stuff about devices and connectivity and skills, but a big part of it is about language. You know, like some of the work that I've been involved in and Anne's been involved in as well, around, you know, particularly around drug deaths in Scotland, and there's still this false narrative that people will immediately sell a device as soon as you give them it, which just actually doesn't hold up. It's not true. But there's still, you know, still this kind of language around it. I think that for me is a big part, that we shouldn't be othering people who can't afford the device or data, and that language thing needs to permeate through the work that we do as well. Fiona, sorry, on your Claudia.
I was just going to say, we ran a pilot project around addiction and digital, and that was something that everyone told us. So people don't get good devices, they'll just sell them. And the people on this project actually kind of treasured the device even more, because we'd gone to the effort to get them a good device that was higher than Android 8, which you can do a lot more with. And it was just highly valued. So it just immediately, that was the one thing in our research that it was an instant, that's not true. And it was just, yeah, really nice to prove that in practice as well.
Yeah. Fiona Boyle, you had a question about getting devices through the door, and I think this is a big one that keeps coming up. Is like, you know, it's great getting those first load of devices that we get, whether it's from Connecting Scotland or another project, but how do we keep this momentum going? So yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a bit about your own situation. Well, you unmuted there. There we go.
I know something I always forget to do is unmute myself.
I do it on every call.
No, we were extremely fortunate when pandemic hit us. We managed to source some money and bought some just media devices to keep people connected and not exclude them digitally. And it worked really quite well with the first 5 that we got. And then as time went on, it was a lot of phone calls, talking them through things. 1 or 2 were a bit more advanced in learning how they managed to go into the Zoom, so they were quite happy with that. But there was other ones where you constantly have to talk through, and then all of a sudden we, kind of eased off a bit. They've managed to keep the devices. It was never to be returned to us. And then eventually they came back and said, look, I don't need this anymore. So we got them and we were able to do all that again. My problem at the moment is I am sitting in my room with 7 computers and nobody wanting to come in and use them. And I don't know how to get them in and have that digital inclusion. It's a difficult thing to do, and I totally understand that people's perceptions has changed since pandemic of being in a room with that. But even those that we gave out, the Connection Scotland devices that we received, they got the devices and then we've never heard from them again. So I don't know if they still have those devices or have sold them, as Claudia said, for food. And it's their choice, but at the same time you feel that responsibility of the fact that they're not digitally included. And it's how do we manage to get these people included again without feeling any sort of pressure? It's a battle.
Yeah, Aaron, I don't know if you want to comment. Maybe also interesting to hear from someone from More Collective, and we've got in the room some thoughts on this.
So it sounds, Fiona, from what I'm kind of picking up from you, is that it's kind of you've used both models. You used the one-to-one with the kind of device gifting, but you've also got the one-to-many model of kind of a hub location where people can come in and get that access.
Yeah, we do have. I offer them a one-to-one on it. It's actually within a community centre. It's a warm, safe space for them to come as well. There's, we have a wee different various things going on, and we also have a food co-op where they can come and get a bag of shopping for £2, which is usually they come for about 2 or 3 bags. So we're trying to sort of stop them from selling their devices so they can still have access to the food and that. But I don't know at the moment.
So it's kind of
just feel it's such a waste. I'm sitting here, 7 computers. I've also got laptops which we can bring out if we have an excess in that are just not getting used. And I feel as though all this is sitting here, and we want to keep people digitally included, but it's just not happening.
Yeah, and that's so it's kind of an engagement thing, isn't it? Of what's the hook to get people in to get engaged with the digital inclusion side of things. I know there are other people on the call now who've done great stuff around that, of getting people through the door. And I know Dave, I'm going to just Dave at Castleton Housing Association, with the work you guys have been doing. And I know you did some work around kind of the online shopping and kind of incentivizing that a little bit as well, but also a lot of work around how you've included the voices of your community and kind of shaping up and kind of co-producing and co-collaborating on your digital inclusion efforts. So Dave, if you don't mind, just hand over, because I think you've got some good examples there.
Okay, pressure's on then.
I know, sorry, Dave.
So we'll get people through the door. The things that we found that get people in contact with us, one of the main ones is not being in our office. So we had a space and we were able to get a free unit in a local shopping centre, which is really good because people are just passing anyway. They don't sort of have to make a destination to go to the housing. It's a place where they are anyway. So I always say there's that like 5-second impulse of just stick my head in and ask a question. And very often that's a really valuable way. And we've since lost that space, and there's definitely been a bit of a drop off from people that we see because of that. So situating yourself in a place where people already are has been really good. Online shopping has been really useful. So we get a voucher, usually for ASDA, and we get a digital champion to sit with people in a big group, one-to-one, and we guide people through their first shop so that they're getting set up for things like downloading the app and setting up an account and those things which I call the hump of the hill to get people over, so that next time they do it, they can just do the kind of basics of book a slot and put your shopping in your basket. So that's been good as well. And yeah, we work with our digital champions who are like local volunteers rather than staff members, to get their ideas about how they want digital inclusion to be done in Castlemilk, so they can help us drive that as well.
Dave, thanks for sharing that. That's really useful. I think we're going to bring in Irene and then we'll move on to another question on this one.
It's really just building on exactly what Dave said. Some of the projects where we've got that kind of limited engagement, the thing that folk that will sort of really engage people is helping other folk. So rather than it being directly about that individual asking for help or asking for support themselves, we're sometimes able to bring them into digital inclusion work where they build their own skills by helping other people. So like Dave's project is an example of that. They're all sort of working together to improve the situation for other folk or develop services in Castlemilk accordingly. And we've done that kind of work elsewhere as well, is sort of go, well, what is it we want to achieve here collectively and how do we go about doing that? And then build digital skills into that approach. And then everybody's kind of working together for a common aim and develop skills like that.
Thanks, Irene. That's brilliant. I'm gonna move on just because I'm conscious of time. So we've got about 25 minutes left. There's actually, Dave, will kind of bring you back in again, I think, because there was a good point that you made about, do professionals in inverted commas still need to be involved in this? Should we be handed over to communities themselves? Should we have done that from the start? So I don't know if you want to give maybe a wee bit of context, and we can see if Aaron and Claudia have any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it's just been rattling about in my head just now, because coming to the end of the financial year, funding is a very hot topic for everyone, and things feel quite perilous for the sector as much as they do for household budgets as well. So certainly a lot of things that we are able to deliver are potentially under threat, including some of the stuff that we do here. So that got me thinking, well, if I'm not here in 1st of April, then what can I do with our digital champions to try and build something that's kind of resilient and sustainable in my absence? And then I thought, well, hang on, well, why have I not been doing that the whole time? Why have I not been trying to legislate myself out of existence, or trying to make myself obsolete, which should be the kind of point of a lot of what I do. So it was a bit of a Monday morning existential crisis about that. But yeah, thinking about how can we have that seeded through the community so that it's not professionalized and it's, as I say, sustainable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Aaron or Claudia, do you want to come in, or both of you?
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me a lot of our kind of partnership model that we're running with our digital groups. Just kind of, they're super informal, and they just go in. We used to call them drop-ins. We don't call them drop-ins anymore, but inevitably we still do. But you kind of go in, and it's not, you don't have to commit to going there for the rest of your life. You can go once, or you can go get regular support, and it's volunteers as well as our coordinators. And there's that idea, because we're working in partnership with these grassroots organizations, kind of small community spaces, that can be continued. So I mean, in a couple of years' time, it could be happening and we might not even be involved anymore. We might have gone, okay, you got this, and we can kind of do something else. And that's kind of our ideal as an organization, which sounds really silly, but we don't want to be needed. We want this stuff to be solved. I mean, on a very high strategic level, digital inclusion is done, data poverty is done, don't need us to do it anymore. But on a kind of smaller, granular level, that these organizations would continue delivering that support, and that would become like a staple. And I think that's also kind of related to the previous question of different organizations working together in partnership. We talk about collaboration a lot, but that someone else's problem could be someone else's solution, and just having those connections and ties can allow that kind of ongoing conversations to happen, and continue to happen.
Yeah, I think I kind of reflected on been doing some work around place-based digital inclusion, and I know Siobhan's popped that into the chat as well to pick up with Fiona, and Dave's one of the people we've been working with as well. One of the things we found from that is, it is a really interesting question, because I think, Dave, you're right, it's not something that I don't think's been really terribly well explored in the digital inclusion sphere. One of the things we did find from kind of the early work on place-based digital inclusion was that leadership locally is really important, at least initially anyway. I think we're probably just not far along this journey of understanding what next and what does future capacity building look like. But certainly there is a key role for some form of leadership in the community, with someone in the voluntary sector or the local authority, to kind of drive that work forward. And that kind of goes back to the earlier question as well about organizations starting their journey. You kind of need that drive, that's someone that's passionate and really gets it to take the work forward. But in terms of next steps, yeah, I think there's space there, and it's something that should be explored around how do you build community capacity then to sustain this work going forward, because we know, she would point out, we've got a running cost crisis in the voluntary sector. Services are being cut, services are being squeezed. We need to get a lot more creative about how we do these things. And it's, you know, digital inclusion lends itself really well to that model too, because it's about informal learning, it's about relationships and people trusting each other and peer learning. So I think that would be an interesting kind of next step on our place-based digital inclusion journey of how we look at that as a capacity building exercise.
Thanks, both. That was really useful. And just as well, if anyone else has got any thoughts on that one, because I think it's really interesting, pop in the chat box, that'd be great. Hannah at Glasgow Disability Alliance, do you want to come in with a point about sustainable transport? It'd be good to hear a bit about that. Is Hannah still here?
Yeah, sure, I'm here. I was just saying, I guess sometimes we talk a bit about being hard to reach versus easy to ignore, and something that we found to be really useful, at least, is putting on transport support, PAs, so personal assistants, and also lunch as a way to engage people to come in. Lunch isn't something we always offer, so for example, every other Thursday we have a one-to-one session where people come in and stay for an hour, and we put on taxis and have personal assistants, and that really makes a difference to us. Fiona, it might be worth also just asking like what the barriers are for people attending. I know it sounds kind of funny and obvious to say transport support, and it's a shame if you're not able to kind of justify it from a funding perspective, but it does seem such a waste if you've got all those devices there and you've got obviously the skills and, like I said in the chat, the enthusiasm to help people. Maybe it's something that, you know, you could consider splashing out for, but for us, I suppose we've worked with disabled people now for so long, and that's something that comes up time and time again, is that people for all sorts of reasons won't come unless we put on transport, and it might be because of the time of their carers, or they've got kind of anxiety around traveling on public transport. Oftentimes for wheelchair users, it's that they wait for a bus for ages and that wheelchair space is already occupied by another wheelchair user or somebody with a pram. It could be wet, it could be a while for them to get to the bus stop, it could be that there's not a drop curb for them, something like that. But that really makes a big difference for us, and it's a huge cost, and it's something we're constantly having to justify to our funders. But for us, it means that we do guarantee attendance. And for example, the session that I'm running tomorrow, digital coaching group session, we are always overly subscribed, because I guess people know that they can get there easily and quickly, and it's just one thing off their mind, I suppose. And I think sometimes it's just that it's easy for people to cancel. I suppose it's easy for people to bail on you when they think, oh, it's a hassle, I can't be bothered, it's raining, or this, that and the other.
Well, it's actually a drop-in we run, so they can come whenever they want. You know, there's no time restriction. I'm open from 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. So normally I'm got quite a few people in the morning, and the afternoons are quiet. So we're looking into maybe setting up kind of wee groups where they can come in and maybe like research or family tree or some things like that, just things that are all digitally included. We're actually, before pandemic, I had about 45, 50 clients in during the week. Now I'm about 15, maybe a week, which is a big drop down. So I don't know where they've all gone. We have other partners who refer clients up to us because I give them the one-on-one, and mostly I'm giving them like confidence support with their IT devices to do their researching, or just using, you know, the Microsoft Word. They come in and they tell me what they want to learn, and I'll take it from there. I don't have a set close saying, right, we're doing this on this day or that on that day. It's, they come in and, you know, they could come in and I could have, right, we're going to learn how to search, and they'll say, no, I just want to know how to get into this, and I'll go with that. because sometimes I go with what they want, because that's the way I kept them coming in the door, and that's the way I hope to keep them coming in the door, which is 15 that I've got just now, but it's not always guaranteed.
Yeah,
it is a struggle. And I feel that we've just had some, I'm not used to using laptops now, I forgot, towers donated by the local council. So that's the 7 new ones that we've got, because the other ones were slowing everything down. So we're updated everything. But apart from going out and just dragging them in, I don't want to.
I think,
and we do offer them, excuse me, we have that warm space where they can come in and they can have like tea, coffee, just for a chat. It's not like, if you just want to come for a chat, that's fine. If you want to bring your device, we don't care what the device is. We'll work with their device that they want to learn on. They don't have to use the computers I have here, but quite a few of them will come in and they'll say, it's better on a computer because I can see it, it's bigger when I'm filling in a form. But a majority are unemployed.
I guess it might be worth asking some people, I guess, why they're not coming in, or maybe the people who are coming in, why they are coming in, what's the appeal and what makes it worthwhile for them. I think we're doing a very similar thing to you, where we're trying to find the hook, and we're not trying to roll out a kind of set program of things, expectations we think our learners should be able to do. We're taking a steer from them. And I think for people who've been digitally excluded forever, often that takes quite a lot of conversation and rapport building for us to actually get to know what kind of things they want to do, because people who've never been online have no concept of what's online. And particularly these days, with more and more things being exclusively online, we're finding we're doing a lot more creative stuff with people than we were at the beginning of the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was so responsive. People wanted to be in touch with friends and family. It was grocery shopping, real essential things. Now we're finding things like people are needing to attend NHS Attend Anywhere appointments. People are wanting refreshers on how to do lateral flow tests, so we're finding them tutorials on YouTube, that kind of thing. I've got somebody who's learning the piano online because she's still shielding, so she has regular Zoom sessions with a tutor. People are kind of doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things online. So I suppose it's also about
I'm going to stop it just now, just because
one of the other things we started doing, one of the other things we started doing is offering intimacy. That's with the NHS involved as well. Sorry, my throat's starting to go.
That's right. Aaron, you were going to come in, I think.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that point, I think that's probably where we've one of the biggest gaps at the moment as well, is kind of understanding kind of community assets across different communities. Because I think this is a really great example of there's a really valuable resource in a community here that's not being used or tapped into, and it's a resource. Probably there's another organization viewing it nearby that's struggling to get devices in or something to be able to have that offer. So it's that thing of, I was talking about our place-based work, understanding community assets. How can we be a lot more strategic about how we stitch a lot of this together and share the resources, and what is that appetite to share resources and kind of strengthen the partnership working in collaboration, because it's such a shame, Fiona, if you've got the resource there ready to go, but it's getting people through the door, and how we can build on that. So I know Siobhan's already messaged you, and we can pick up after this call.
Yes, I think there's some interesting chat as well. I mean, like Dave and also Irene in the chat box think like there's bigger questions, like Fiona's project aside, but bigger questions to the sector as a whole of operating within office hours, and then that, I guess, that irony that we have as a sector of operating within office hours, but we're talking about digital, which offers the potential to connect with people and at the times that are convenient to them, but a lot of the models of delivery that we're still offering are those kind of 9 to 5 models, and what might that look like, and what are the ways of doing that. So it'd be interesting, I mean, if anyone's got any thoughts on that, if anyone's been doing any work that's out with the 9 to 5, it'd be interesting to hear from you. No answers. That is a big answer question. Dave, you got any thoughts on that?
We have done some stuff at other times, like the online shopping stuff that we do, and we moved it even from a weekday evening to a weekend daytime. Got quite a lot better attendance. It's a bit of trial and error, I think. I also think maybe we built a lot of this stuff in lockdown when a lot of people had a lot of spare time during office hours because they were furloughed or they were working from home. So maybe we kind of fell into that a bit, just because it wasn't a barrier at the time.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Claudia, you've got your hand up, but you've got also a yellow background, so I didn't see the hand, so I apologise.
Sorry, it's not yet. It's just terrible lighting.
I
was going to come in on just to echo Aaron's point. I don't know if it's okay to go back just slightly on the place-based collaboration. I actually worked on a guide around this, so I can send that link through if that's useful. Just kind of making use of those tools. Exactly like Aaron said. I mean, we're partnered with Edinburgh Remakery because their forte is refurbishment, and rather than compete with them, we thought, why not join forces with them? So they do the majority of they do all the refurbishment work when we focus on the digital skills support, and that's always kind of been our forte. So I think that's just a really why it's a big part of our social innovation ethos, rather than competing, kind of collaborate. And in that way as well, in terms of that transport question that we had, you can kind of, in working with other people all over Scotland, all over the UK, you can be doing more things in more places without necessarily having offices in every single city in existence. So that's a big part of how we work. And I just think that's such a undervalued point.
Yeah, thanks for that, Claudia. That was really useful. That's a good question from Aaron. Those doing digital inclusion work now, does it feel like a bigger job than it was during the pandemic? That's an excellent question. Anyone want to come in on that? Anyone we've not heard from so far?
I'll just elaborate on that in the
meantime. Go for it.
I think just from my perspective, I feel like it's a harder sell now. I feel like getting people to buy into digital inclusion feels like it was pre-pandemic, where you were kind of going out and making the case for it and selling the benefits. And that became a lot easier during the pandemic because it was so essential, it was so acute, it was framed as the lifeline, but it feels like it's drifted back now. So I definitely kind of, from where we sit in the work we do, it feels like a slightly harder job, a different job maybe than it was. But I'm just wondering, I'm really interested from more a front line actually doing the work in communities as well. How does that feel with people at the moment?
Yeah, I don't know, Hannah, do you want to come back in on that one? I'd be interested in hear from you.
Oh yeah, I've just made a comment there just saying it's a lot more complex, the things that people need now, just reiterating what I was saying earlier, that in the beginning we were so reactive, people were so desperate to just kind of stay connected and reduce social isolation, have food, that kind of stuff. But these days people are wanting to do a lot more creative stuff online, I suppose, and part of that is because services are exclusively happening online. And I know we've talked about this a little bit already in the session, but at GDA, we agree that online is not the only way. It's really important for us that organizations continue to offer offline kind of analog traditional solutions for people, particularly disabled people. Otherwise, we find that digital divide in our community is just growing and growing. I think also it's so, to answer your question, Aaron, it's so much harder now to convince other organizations that we should continue to be operating in the space, and that digital inclusion is still so important. I think a lot of people have this attitude that, oh, we've resolved that, pandemic's over, we can go back to face, so we don't need to focus that, we don't need to fund those kind of priorities. And actually for our community, disabled people have seen so much potential come from here because suddenly they can attend courses online. You know, there is a lot more flexibility than there was before the pandemic, and we're really keen to, I guess, keep some of the good things that we've learned from the pandemic that have come out of it, and continue to offer those for disabled people. So I think but it is really hard to convince particularly funders that digital inclusion is work that is permanently going to be of importance to us, at least.
This question, I guess, for Hannah and Claudia, probably everyone in the room. Do you feel that in more of your general funding applications, so not specifically necessarily for digital inclusion work, that you will be embedding digital inclusion costs and elements into that? Does that feel like a thing that will happen in the future?
I can say that definitely that's something that we've already been doing, where we're trying to put digital inclusion work into everything we're applying for, because there is always an aspect of digital inclusion work required in all of our projects. It's something that we're trying to make, I see some thumbs up and nods, that we're trying to make mainstream. And so definitely we want to be able to continue funding that, but it is hard. I don't know, Claudia, if you've experienced similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit, because our organization is our sister service, well, the sister service to our digital support service is it's about helping young people in transition from primary to secondary school. So it's not kind of automatically what you would think of as having anything to do with digital, but COVID really proved to us when overnight we had to put everything online that, like, yes, it is all interconnected. And we've started we had a really great news piece at the end of last year. Someone that was being supported by our young people service, their grandmother was being supported by our digital service. And only through having that conversation was that kind of link realized. And it was just a really interesting one to see pan out. So yeah, I mean, generally, I think I'm a very big advocate on having funds for digital generally in organizations in the third sector, because that's not a kind of normal thing. Especially as someone whose job is communications and digital. It's not necessarily a role that I see in other people's organizations, because there isn't a fund you can apply to necessarily to get that to fund that post. It is kind of taken from other things that we're doing, and a lot of funds don't necessarily even acknowledge that that's needed. So it's difficult to allocate those funds as well. So it's definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, sorry, just to wrap up, I think we've talked about this briefly, but another thing that continues to be an issue for our members is maintaining the cost of broadband. So it's wonderful to get a free device and people are really appreciative, but actually a lot of people aren't able to maintain the ongoing cost of broadband due to the cost of living crisis and, you know, all the other issues we've already discussed. I had a woman who we gave her an iPad, and I noticed in a Zoom meeting she wasn't using it, and I'd said to her, why have you gone back to your phone? And she said, well, I can't justify the cost of charging my iPad. She didn't know how much it cost, but she was very scared about it. She was a power wheelchair user, and her chair needed to charge for 4 hours a day. And she'd said to me, well, I'm making the decision that I need to be able to get out and about, and I'm prioritizing my power wheelchair. So I'm not charging the iPad, even though it had tremendous benefits for her. She was able to actually join a Zoom call and see things. She was able to do all the things, you know, we know that we've done with people over the pandemic, but because she felt that the cost of keeping it charged was so much, she had put it away in a drawer. And actually, unfortunately, the cost of charging an iPad is very little. I think maybe it's about £5 a year if you're using it every day. And obviously, that's not to say to somebody who's living in poverty, that's nothing, just suck it up. But it's a shame that somebody is making a decision that so significantly impacts their well-being based on effectively £5 a year. You know, I just felt like saying, here's £5. Use that as much as you want, you know.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I think sorry, you go, Claudia.
Sorry, no, I was just I wrote another guide, the Good Things Foundation, about how for organizations supporting people with connectivity. And one of the things that I certainly hadn't considered before writing this guide was the cost of like plugging in a router into the wall versus a MiFi that it only needs to be charged occasionally, but kind of weighing those two up. And it was just so interesting because that hadn't really occurred to me before until I was researching it. And yeah, those kind of hidden costs as well as the actual costs and things like social tariffs, which are great. But I remember looking at them, and I'm a huge advocate for social tariffs, we are, but I remember looking at them and thinking, one of these social tariffs is just £5 or less than my actual internet at home. So it's these kind of, that's £5 again, that cost might be insignificant sum, but to others, that's a big obstacle. So those little details that you only notice until you're properly into it.
Claudia. Just to finish up, because I'm conscious we've got a couple of minutes left, there's been some really, really useful insights. I think at the core of this, like Maddie might even want to jump in this a wee bit as well, I guess, is how are we involving users and understanding what their needs are right now, and actually how we might shift services based on that. Maddie, I don't know if you want to come in on that. If you've got any thoughts on it.
I think that's what's, for me, what's been the key messages is that back to the basics of what we're all talking about is service design and co-producing and co-creating things with the people that we're here to serve, as opposed to that kind of more traditional model of being prescriptive. This is what we've got, this is what you'll use. It's more about actually asking them, how does this work for you? How can we make this be the best possible service that it can be for you? And that's where, for me, digital inclusion in particular has been trailblazing and really changing hearts and minds around that traditional model of service delivery and flipping things on its head and finding new ways of getting to people, reaching people, and making things work effectively. So very much that service design approach for me has just been, it's been fantastic to hear about from people, to say, actually, where are the people that we're trying to get? How do we get to them, as opposed to how do we get them to us? Where do we go? How do we get out? How can we reach them? So that's my 2 pennies worth.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. I think like part of it as well is like, what we're hearing from this as well is like the barriers to getting online now are so different from the start of the pandemic. So if electricity is a huge concern for people in a way that it wasn't 2 years ago, what's the information that we can give to people to understand that if I charge something that's going to cost on average X amount per day to charge an iPad, like, do we have that information readily available, and then people can make choices based on that? John, before we finish up, any final thoughts from you?
I think just very similar to what Maddie was saying. I think what I think Dave was highlighting about just remembering what's going on in people's lives, because that stat about charities just stepping back from digital inclusion work, there's a massive assumption there that it's done, and clearly it's not done. And then the other pieces we were talking about in terms of, if you're a locally based organization, you understand what other challenges people are facing, what's important to them, and then you can use that to shape services. So yeah, it's been a really interesting discussion to kind of hear all the perspectives, definitely. And I'm sure we could probably keep going for a lot longer.
Yeah, we could probably keep going for the next couple of hours.
But yeah, thanks so much to everyone for contributing.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Anne and Claudia in particular for all your insights, and everyone else in the room that shared some really, really useful discussions today. Some good stuff in the chat as well, if you want to kind of click on those links and bookmark them. Just say we've got our next DigiShift is coming up next month, which you can book through the SCVO website. We've also got a bunch of free training coming up, which you can book on the Third Sector Lab website. If you click on the training tab, you can book free workshops there as well. Thanks so much for everyone coming along. That was excellent today. It was really good. Thanks for all your contributions. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. I just popped a link to the next event in chat. But see you there. Thank you,
John. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for the contributions.
Well, that was really good. It's probably one of the ones that's been the most involved, the kind of people in the room in a while, which has been really nice. It's been excellent.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed for the time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Didn't know at the start. Yeah.
What was that? I didn't know the start.
I didn't know we're going to get many questions.
I know.
It's very often like that. There's a wee moment where people, they're just kind of getting their head around it, but that was really good discussion, so thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for still
both. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you all later.
No problem.
See you later. Cheers, everyone.
Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.